This video presentation became an inadvertent sister piece to my earlier Sgt Pepper's Intel Band, Operatives, Acids, Spies and Double Agents one. Similar to the Beatles Sgt Pepper cover, McCartney's friends on the Band on the Run cover have dots that connect to intelligence officers, double agents, black magicians, and the inevitable 70s British showbiz paedophile. Welcome to a deep dive into 3 of Paul McCartney's band of friends. One Rolling Stone magazine reviewer described McCartney's Band on the Run album as being the finest record yet by a former Beatle, with the possible exception of John Lennon's Plastic Ono Band. It was McCartney's last album released on Apple Records, and in 2013 it was inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame. Released in November 1973, McCartney's Wings album was a big improvement on his previous albums, but I never bought it, or Lennon's. Instead, I was listening to The Who's Quadrophenia that reflected my days as a 60s mod, Mike Oldfield's Tubular Bells, Genesis's album Selling England by the Pound, Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon, and others creating progressive music such as Van de Graaff Generator. McCartney's Band on the Run album was no longer relevant to me or my friends. Time and musical tastes had moved on. But at the time, I did wonder what on earth that seemingly odd mix of people were doing on the Band on the Run front cover. So just how did ex-Beatle Paul McCartney persuade Clement Freud, Michael Parkinson, James Coburn, Christopher Lee, boxer John Conte, and Kenny Lynch to don convict garb and pose for a picture, along with the other members of his group Wings, to illustrate the sleeve of his latest LP, Band on the Run? Said one of McCartney's men, he invited them to lunch. They're all people he likes. After lunch they went out to Osterley Park to shoot the picture. Triggered by that old press cutting, I started to look at how those people on the Band on the Run cover are connected to the Beatles, and if they were connected to each other in some way. Starting with Kenny Lynch, a person I remembered from the past thanks to his UK hit Up on the Roof, which was released in January 1963. It was a song I loved at the time, without realising it was a cover of the Drifters song written by Jerry Goffin and Carole King, which emanated from the New York Brill Building. Singer, songwriter, actor and entertainer Kenny Lynch had long, yet possibly overlooked connections to the Beatles. On Sunday the 28th of October 1962, just as the Cuban Missile Crisis came to an end, when Russian leader Khrushchev announced that he had agreed to remove his rockets from Cuba, the world had narrowly avoided being blown to bits in a nuclear war. It was also good news for the Liverpool Empire when that evening the Beatles were on the bill there for the first time, coincidentally with Kenny Lynch. This was the concert where the Beatles first met Billy Preston, who was backing Little Richard and who would later play on the group's Get Back sessions. Kenny Lynch was also on the bill when the Beatles came to my town on their first UK-wide tour in early February 1963, when both were support acts for Helen Shapiro. In addition to touring England with the Beatles, Lynch covered Lennon and McCartney's Misery, which Lennon and McCartney wrote in January 1963 and hoped that Helen Shapiro would record it. but her management had other song ideas for her. Misery was the first cover version of a Beatles song to be released, but it turned out to be a flop for Kenny Lynch. The Beatles recorded the song themselves on their debut album Please Please Me. It was whilst on a coach with the Beatles on tour with Helen Shapiro that Lynch reportedly offered to help them write a song, but quickly became frustrated and criticised their ability to compose music and called them bloody idiots. But that didn't prevent him a decade later from appearing on the cover of Wings' Band on the Run album. Lynch didn't write songs with the Beatles, but he did write successful songs for another one of my favourite groups. By a strange coincidence, Lynch worked briefly as a songwriter at the Brill Building in New York, the place where his major UK hit Up on the Roof originated, where he met the singer, pianist and songwriter Mort Schumann, and the pair wrote Sha-La-La-La-Lee for the Small Faces, which became a number 3 hit in 1966, and also wrote You Better Believe It, co-written with Jerry Ragavoy, and Sorry She's Mine, which appeared on the Small Faces 1966 debut album, which was the first record I ever bought. Ironically, Lynch also wrote Cilla Black's 1966 number 5 UK hit, Love's Just a Broken Heart, in collaboration with Mort Schumann, which reached a higher chart position than any of the Beatles songs she sang. So he achieved more for Cilla than those bloody idiots, as he previously called them. Coincidentally, the B-side of this single was the Beatles' classic Yesterday. Speaking of Cilla Black, Lynch, together with other doyens of British music and entertainment industry, attended her funeral, where there were naturally a number of guests with both family and long-past connections to the Beatles. Paul McCartney's brother, Mike McGear, was in attendance along with John Lennon's old schoolmate, Jimmy Tarbuck. Tarbuck was photographed here with his fist raised in a boxing stance during the Dovedale Junior School trip to Douglas on the Isle of Man in 1951. Kenny Lynch and Tarbuck frequently performed together over the years. Both were part of the British equivalent of the Rat Pack, together with Bruce Forsyth, the English entertainer and television presenter whose career spanned more than 70 years. Aside from stardom, golf was a uniting force for these celebrities. Here's a photo of Band on the Run cover friends Michael Parkinson and Kenny Lynch at a golf tournament, plus Jimmy Tarbuck on the far right. Cilla was part of Brian Epstein's stable of Liverpool groups and artists. The Lennon and McCartney song Love of the Love, produced by George Martin, was chosen for her debut single. Sung in a nasally Liverpool accent, the single reached number 35 in the UK chart in October 1963. Not exactly an instant hit, despite being a Lennon and McCartney composition. Cilla Black had better luck with her 4th UK single, It's For You, her second single to be written by Lennon and McCartney, although it was mainly a McCartney composition, which reached number 7 in the UK singles chart in 1964. In the US, Black's version of the song peaked at number 79. So it looks like Beatles songs covered by other artists didn't carry much weight with the American record buying public back in 1964. But it did reach number 24 in Canada. As I mentioned previously, Kenny Lynch wrote the song Love's Just a Broken Heart for Cilla Black, which was a number 5 hit in the UK. Lynch collaborated with American songwriter Mort Schumann on the song, which Black sang on The Ed Sullivan Show on the 27th of March 1966. Unfortunately, the song didn't chart at all in America and was a total flop, like the majority of Cilla Black's singles released in America, with the exception of her cover version of the Italian ballad You're My World, which charted at number 26 in the American Billboard chart in 1964, and was a big improvement stateside on Lennon and McCartney's It's For You, released earlier that year. The Fabs didn't always have that Midas touch, any more than their manager, Brian Epstein. In 1967, Paul McCartney's song Step Inside Love became the theme for Cilla Black's BBC TV series called Simply Cilla, which first aired on the 30th of January 1968. Cilla Black knew Paul McCartney before and after the September 1966 alleged death date of the Beatle. But whatever secrets she knew, she took to her grave. Kenny Lynch had boxing in common with John Conte, the one other black guy he shared the Band on the Run cover with. In 1957, Lynch began his national service as a driver in the Royal Army Service Corps, where he became the regimental featherweight boxing champion. In common with other showbiz personalities, Lynch sometimes brushed shoulders with the senior figures of London life. His circle of friends included associates of the Cray family and members of the East End boxing fraternity. Lynch attended the funeral of Joey Pyle, a former boxer who had worked for the Crays. Pyle became a boxing instructor at Sandhurst during his national service. When Pyle's father, a thief as well as a sportsman himself, asked him when he was 19 whether he wanted to be a boxer or a thief, Joey chose to be a career criminal and became a gangland boss, convicted criminal and pioneer and promoter of unlicensed boxing from the 1950s until his final arrest and conviction in 1992. Kenny Lynch went on to play minor parts in some British sexploitation comedies of the late 60s and 70s, which were written off as an embarrassing chapter in UK cinema history. But these slap and tickle romps broke box office records and helped keep the homegrown film industry afloat. Back then, there was no access to nudity or porn. Suddenly there were sex films playing in 800-seat Odeon cinemas. The era's so-called permissive society opened the floodgates to frisky farces that made the carry-on films look tame. Kenny Lynch appeared in both British sexploitation and carry-on films. But it was his appearance in the horror film Dr. Terror's House of Horrors where the connection is made with his fellow Band on the Run associate, Christopher Lee, who will be coming up in part 2 of this series. In 2006, Lynch serenaded the Queen and Duke of Edinburgh at a surprise 80th birthday party for Her Majesty at a restaurant in Mayfair. Accompanied by the pianist Laurie Holloway, Lynch sang several wartime songs, including People Will Say We're in Love and The Way You Look Tonight, which drew the thumbs up from Prince Philip. I have to say, Kenny Lynch gets a thumbs up from me too, but probably for 1960s nostalgic reasons. In 2018, Lynch had a concert tour with his old friend Jimmy Tarbuck, an English actress, singer and entertainer, Anita Harris, as well as appearing in ITV Television's Last Laugh in Vegas. which proved to be his last curtain call. Kenny Lynch died from prostate cancer in Oxfordshire on the 18th of December 2019, aged 81.